Hello, we are going to be discussing the Netflix show called Explain, Season 2, Episode 1, called Cults. I am joined today by Dennis, who is in Portland, Oregon, and by Mark, who is in Wadsworth, Ohio. Mark is a former member of Restored Church of God, and Dennis is a former member / minister of the Worldwide Church of God. Thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you.
We are going to go over some key points in regards to the show. Reason being is because several people want us to define Worldwide Church of God or Restored Church of God as a cult. I'm not an expert, so I can't just put a label on anything. So we're just going to discuss it, and you as the viewers can go ahead and decide for yourselves. This was a very interesting episode. They broke things down very well, and so we're going to be going over some of those key points and just having a discussion over it. They start out in the beginning, groups called cults are led by charismatic leaders. They have extreme beliefs and have fanatic followers. Social scientists in the United States published research attempting to define these destructive groups had in common. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of discuss both of the different types of churches and see how, if or not, they fit in those timelines. It says they settled on three main characteristics. Cult is a group of people or social movement that's led by a charismatic leader who is an authoritarian and who were taught to believe what he said was straight from the mouth of God. In the community, as we called it, he was God's authority. So how do you feel about either Armstrong or Pack fitting into that charismatic leader category?
Well, speaking for the Worldwide Church of God experience and Herbert Armstrong, absolutely. He was the authority in the church. His perspective in the Bible, of the scriptures that was promoted was his. He did not take advice, on maybe other approaches to doctrine. So in that respect, yeah, absolutely. He did fit that category. Very authoritarian, and he always talked about God's government is from the top down, and I heard even one evangelist when I was a student say there's God, there's Jesus Christ, there's Herbert W. Armstrong and his son Garner Ted Armstrong, and then this evangelist said, and then there's me and several other leading evangelists. That was the pecking order. I was 18 years old when I heard that. And I to this day, remember, wow, that sounds kind of creepy,
Mark, what's your take for David C. Pack?
I went ahead and for the sake of this, looked up the words because I want to, those words charismatic and fanatic. I wanted to look it up. What do those words actually mean? Charismatic is exercising a compelling charm which inspires devotion in others. I would not say that applies to David Pack. Calling him charismatic is really kind of stretching. He's a dynamic speaker. He speaks very loudly and very firmly. I don't know if he inspires anyone, but he certainly is somebody that can speak with interest. And as far as being, inspiring fanatics, a person filled with excessive and single-minded zeal. I can't say that, necessarily that I would have considered myself a fanatic or the people in the Restored Church of God as a fanatic with single-minded zeal, except for the fact that you have what's called a first love when you discover the truth about the Bible and devote your life to it. And I'm sure Dennis could disagree with that. But I don't know if specifically I could say Dave Pack or the Restored Church of God fits into that first point.
Well, if I could say, and the same thing, I never found fanaticism among the membership. They were just people that were seeking more accurate biblical information, which seemed to come from the church. That's why I was captivated by it. But I don't see any fanatical, never saw any fanatical. There were occasionally people who fit that category, but usually the church ended up having to ask them to either tone it down or perhaps this wasn't the church for them. So I wouldn't say the membership of the Worldwide Church of God was fanatical either. They're very sincere people. And it was, when I came in the church, it was the 60s. I mean, it seemed like the whole world was falling apart, and it helped, to understand. Of course, it still seems like it's falling apart. So that motivation to come to people who can give you those kind of answers and encouragement is still there, and it always will be there, because the world, frankly, is always going to be falling apart for every generation.
Now, as for fanatic, it seems like we're agreeing upon that was neither. As far as charismatic and authoritarian,
Yes.
I see that in both. Charismatic, I think it depends on, there is the official definition, and then there is, a personal view of charismatic. I think being on the outside, since I was never a member of any of these churches, I would have to think that somebody is charismatic to have me even interested in going along with their beliefs.
If I could say just at this
has to
point,
catch your attention with them, because in the end, when it's all said and done, you're following them. They are the Word of God.
if I could just say that the Worldwide Church of God had that dimension. Herbert Armstrong was more behind the scenes, at least in my experience. I only met him one time, but the charismatic leadership of the church was his son, Garner Ted Armstrong. Garner Ted had charisma, and he was on the radio, television, all over the world during the peak of his career. He had the charisma that drew most of the people into the church and the media. Herbert Armstrong was older, but he was behind the scenes for the most part of my ministry, and traveling the world and doing other things. But it was definitely his son, Garner Ted, that was the charismatic element in the Worldwide Church of God.
So if you're saying that Gardner Ted that could possibly apply to RCG, and the fact that maybe the ministers themselves were charismatic in doing the work for David Pack, as in regards to, say, the tithing of common, handing over extra funds, things like that. For me to do something like that, I think to myself, it has to take someone special, something about the personality to make me be like, okay.
Well, if I can speak to Restored Church of God in my own experience, Dave Pack would use the Bible, and he's a master magician, sleight of hand, playing a shell game with the scriptures, where he can put the scriptures together and make them say whatever he wants. Dave Pack has not and does not use charisma to convince people about common. He basically pulls from the scriptures a series of verses and says, you won't get in the kingdom unless you give. And the people sitting in the chair, and I think Dennis can probably, is what he's saying about Worldwide Church of God, and there's no fanatics. People don't follow, they don't think they follow the person. At least nobody comes into the church because Dave Pack is just a wonderful guy and he's just so charming and I can't wait to get close to him. It's like, wow, this man is speaking the truth in a way that I never understood before. He's presenting the Bible in a way I never heard before. And I know for a fact, I did not join the Restored Church of God for David Pack. I didn't join for him. I joined because this was the place that seemed like God was using, and he's using this man to preach the truth from the Bible in a way I never heard before. So he doesn't use personality or charisma to sell common, but he uses the Bible and the verses to say whatever he wants it to say, whether he's Elijah or not Elijah, whether he's David in the Old Testament or not David, and that common is a requirement for salvation. So to say that its personality kind of discounts the wicked brilliance of how Dave Pack uses the scriptures to get it to say what he wants. So people listen because they believe that God is using him to teach the Bible, not because he's just a charming guy and I can't wait to hear his voice again.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. That was also with Worldwide. There was a charismatic element, but it was what the church taught, whether it was about the kingdom of God or the times in which we live, or the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, or not keeping Christmas because it's pagan. All of those things can make sense. And there's whole other denominations that also believe those things to this day that are unrelated to the Worldwide Church of God. So I was drawn into the church because of what it taught, not who taught it.
Moving on to the second one, it says the second key element of a cult. The group has some form of indoctrination program, sometimes called thought reform or mind control. It was almost like the operating system of the Bible. And he was putting all his programs in there to top it off. And people would kind of accept it because they accepted the Bible, so they believed it had to be. So this part of the episode is basically stating that there was some form of indoctrination when you wanted to join, because we've already stated that Worldwide and Restored didn't go out and recruit. People who wanted to be a part of it is the ones that went to the churches. So do you feel that there was a form of indoctrination in Worldwide, Dennis?
No more than any other church. Indoctrination in a church is called weekly services, sermons. But in Worldwide, we had like Spokesman's Club, Bible studies. The pressure to be there, to go to them, to participate was always pretty strong. So if you could say that was indoctrination. But just going to church is indoctrination. Just having the Bible read to you over and over is indoctrination of any denomination. That's how you stay seated, is let's look at this part, let's look at that part. Let's be this way, let's not be that way. That is indoctrination. That's religion does that just naturally because it's trying to get you to see one particular point of view from different people's perspectives, different leaders and their perceptions of what the Bible teaches. So it's all indoctrination. Once you step through the door, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, or Wednesday, it's indoctrination.
Mark, in regards to the question for, I don't want to say full mind control, but they talk about the Bible inputting their own programming. And it's already been stated that, Armstrong interpreted the Bible the way that he felt from the Worldwide Church of God. And then David C. Pack was carrying that over. There are several things in the Bible that people feel that, David Pack put in there. And that is a form of mind control in regards to, outside, everybody is evil, things like that. What is your opinion?
Well, first, no Church of God teaches that everybody outside is evil. What they teach is that it's the devil's world and these people are trapped in the devil's world. The Bible does talk about the righteous of this world. So there are people outside of any Church of God that even God calls them the righteous of this world. But as far as mind control, when you're coming into an organization like a Church of God, you're already accepting the fact that everything you thought you knew was wrong. So you're basically you're supposed to, even Jesus said that you're supposed to, receive the kingdom as a little child. Children are open to suggestion. They're open to teaching. If they're obedient, they want to serve and do the things the right way and learn how to do things the right way. So you come in as an adult and you just accept the fact, well, everything I thought I knew was wrong about my life and about God and what the world teaches. So therefore, you're open to the concept of, you can call it indoctrination if you want, that you're changing the way that you think. The way you think about the world, the way you think about God, the way you think about the Bible, the way you think about yourself. You change your behaviors as an outward show that I really believe this and I want to devote myself to it. And that's what I did. The changes I went through was so dramatic and so quick that even the owners of the company I worked for sat me down and wanted to know, are you okay? Because I'm like, oh, because I'm not having sex with girls and doing drugs and drinking and getting drunk and, swearing every day, that concerns you? And they're like, yeah, because that's not who you are. And I'm like, I didn't like who I was now through the lens of the Bible. So the problem with Dave Packin specifically was that he did teach things that are very different than what he's been teaching the last 5 years when he started this prophecy series. I felt that Restored was the right place, and I devoted everything I had to it. And then he changed it. He saw himself in the Bible. He started teaching things that are not what Herbert W. Armstrong taught. And over the past 5 to 6, 7 years, he's been dismantling what Mr. Armstrong taught when he promised everyone at the beginning of the Restored Church of God that he was going to hold fast to what Herbert Armstrong taught. So there is an indoctrination inherent in Christianity through the churches of God, but that's part of the process and not necessarily mind control, but your willingness to see things through the Bible lens, which those verses are there. Dave Pack didn't invent it. Herbert Armstrong didn't invent it. He's using the Bible as a way of changing the way you think.
Okay, moving on to number 3. There is exploitation, either sexual, financial, some type of exploitation of the members. So when I'm thinking of either one, WCG or RCG, I would say more financial. Dennis, what is your thoughts?
Well, I think as Mark pointed out, even if there were financial pressure put on people, you could go to many scriptures and show this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to tithe 10%. If you're going to go to church festivals, you keep a second tithe. If you're going to help the widows, you keep a third tithe. And you're getting broke pretty quickly. It was the enforcement of that. It wasn't a choice. It was, told that that's what you really have to do. So what was again the question? What was it specifically?
That if you saw that in Worldwide Church of God as financial being exploitation.
Yeah, I don't think it was deliberate. I think, as Mark said, you find these things in the Bible. The Bible says these things. We had topics like divorce and remarriage. Well, it's in the Bible. It's a matter of interpretation. So I've always said, and of course I'm further out of it than Mark is, and thought a lot more about why I'm not what I am used to be. The Bible is probably the best case that can be made for why all these things go so badly wrong. That information, those commands, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, is all in the book. And so then you get somebody that's willing to enforce it, and you get these kind of difficulties. But I don't think it wasn't mind control. It was just exploitation. I think if anything, it was people who sincerely, maybe they came from a very liberal church background, and now they feel like, I haven't even been obeying God at all. And now I see what the Bible really teaches. So their sincerity was coming from the person. It wasn't being enforced on them by others. They wanted to do the right thing and could be convinced, well, if you want to do the right thing, then let's go to this scripture, let's go to that scripture. And that can get out of control really quickly.
Mark, how is your opinion in regards to financial possibly being an exploitation for Restored Church of God?
In part 2 of our discussion about the Restored Church of God, and if people are interested and they really want to get into common, because we talked about that for almost 45 minutes, and I won't rehash all that here, is the common doctrine, which is from the book of Acts, where everyone gave as they had need and they had all things common. And Dave Pack has turned that into basically a financial machine for him to say you can't get salvation without obeying this doctrine, even though that's not necessarily what's explicitly said in the Bible. It is a form of exploitation if people are willing, and I was willing, to be exploited. Because I was willing to sacrifice for God's way and God's work. I was willing to take a pay cut. I was willing to get rid of my retirement. I was willing to live, not as a quote lavish lifestyle, even though I probably could have afforded a little bit more here in Ohio, but I saw it as a way to sacrifice. And when the book talks about sacrificing and that is pleasing to God, yes, you allow exploitations, you want to call it that, financially, because that helps the church, more so it helps the campus, not necessarily helping the church at large. It helps headquarters, it helps the ministers, it helps the employees, it helps the more trees on the campus here in Wadsworth. And there's another form of what you could call exploitation, which some would call slave labor, but you call it volunteering. And I know this went on in the Worldwide Church of God, where you would give your time and energy, and we had volunteers working Monday through Friday in the mail shop and Restored, but also, tending, pulling weeds, spreading mulch on the campus on Sundays. And I did that because that was my duty, and I felt good about sacrificing for the work and donating my time. So volunteering could also be seen as an exploitation too.
Could I interject something here? On the doctrine of common, in the Bible, in the book of Acts, the teaching of common was meant to be temporary. It was temporary because Jesus was coming soon. This was a last ditch effort to all work together to share because Jesus was coming soon. It was never intended to be a lifestyle, a way the churches should be. It was a temporary injunction. And when Jesus didn't come soon, and it went long and longer and longer and longer, and more people came into the church, more wealthy people, more Greek-speaking people, more educated people, they were not about to give everything to the church. And the soon became so long that the church dropped it. They just dropped the common thing. You don't see that mentioned anywhere else in the rest of the Bible, the New Testament, after they began to realize that, well, where's the promise of his coming? The motive for doing common was gone, that Jesus was not coming back soon, and wealthy people were coming into the church, and they weren't about to give common. And it died its common death. It did. It was only a temporary injunction in the book of Acts because the return of Christ was so imminent that let's all do this together because we're not going to be here very long. Now, Dave can do common because in his mind, he thinks Jesus is coming back Monday. If not Monday, then Wednesday. If not Wednesday, then Sunday. But that's going to get old real quick. In fact, it already has. But the original teaching on common in the New Testament was a temporary thing based on the fact that we don't have to keep our stuff because Jesus is coming back soon. And when Jesus didn't come back and more people came in the church who were not going to give up their houses, were not going to give up their jobs, weren't going to give all their money to the church, it just simply disappeared from Scripture.
And one other point, I'm sorry, Dennis, one other point about common is that it distributed to all those that had need, which means the common doctrine was for the benefit of the church membership.
Absolutely, and it didn't translate that way.
But the way Dave Pack has taken it, it doesn't benefit the church brethren. It doesn't give to those that have need. It's not a replacement for third tithe. It's right now used to sustain the campus. That is the purpose. There's no media programs. There's no video. They're not buying airtime on TV stations. They're not pumping out new literature. They're not doing outreach programs where they're doing public Bible studies. Hey, come and learn about us. So that money is only used to sustain the campus. And the members of the Restored Church of God maybe don't articulate it or think of it that way. But the only way common helps anyone in the Restored Church of God is if you're a minister, if you're an employee, and you live on the campus in Wadsworth and Ohio. That's the only people that benefit from it.
And I would say as well that based on information that I do have, the finances of the Restored Church of God are kind of on the edge. That campus is very, very expensive to maintain. And so I totally agree with you that some form of income has to come in just to pay the bills. And that evidently is a struggle at this point with the church. So yeah, you're right. That money at common doesn't go to feed widows, doesn't go to people who sold their house and now they can't afford rent in an apartment until Jesus comes back. That's not going to happen. It is to keep that campus going. And from what I understand, that is becoming increasingly more difficult.
Okay, moving on. This is a real good, interesting part. It is trying to say what the problem is with the word cult, and just naming any organization or religious sect a cult. It says, but there's a small problem with the definition of cult. It's a value judgment more than it's a functional word. Every prophet of every single religion can be considered a charismatic leader. In fact, the biggest joke in religious studies is that cult plus time equals religion. Cult comes from the Latin word cultus, meaning to till or cultivate, and in antiquity was used to describe the sacrifices, offerings, and movements built to cultivate favor with the gods. In time, it came to mean any unorthodox religion. We know the Roman Empire referred to Judaism as a cult. Some say that certain versions of Islam can even be considered a cult. Nowadays, scholars are using a different term. They prefer to use the word new religion movement, known as NRM. And many arose not to exploit their followers, but to help them survive in the face of external threat. The collective's very sensitive sense of self is undertaken by the world, and the only way to salvage one's identity is to come together under the leadership of this charismatic authority and to rebuild from scratch. So going into that, we did talk about in regards to could new religion movement be considered for Worldwide Church of God? Church of God already pre-existed. We discussed this, but Herbert Armstrong kind of did his own version off to the side. Dennis, do you feel that it could be considered a new religion movement?
I think the religion itself, Herbert Armstrong considered the Worldwide Church of God to be the reappearance of the old religion, the original religion of the New Testament. Jewish Christianity is the original kind of Christianity. Nobody believes they belong to a cult. You know, if you asked me years ago, are you in a cult? I'd say, well, no, I'm in the true church. Everybody on every religious affiliation, they'll all say, I don't care if you're Presbyterian or Catholic, nobody says, yeah, I know I'm in a false church. I know I'm in a cult, but I enjoy this. Everybody's in the true church. It's just this is how it goes, or we wouldn't be in it. So, you know, I think that it's not a new church, it's not a new religion, it's a new spin on an old religion. And a lot of times that's what you have. It's established beliefs, and somebody comes along and either enlivens it, enriches it, or gives it a different spin, you know. And
well, we talked about going back that when Armstrong was doing his radio series, I mean, he was very specific in talking about, you know, the times. Let's think about it. You know, you had World War I, you had World War II going on. I mean, the sense of urgency back then of, you know, what was going to happen to you. And then moving forward to today's society, I mean, we got a lot going on. Politics, different things with the religion, wars. So you can see how PAC on that end will consider a lot that's going on outside the church is harmful, you know, to the members if they participate in. So I guess you could kind of say that that's when the new movement, I guess you could consider that some people look at that it is a newer religion, but you educated me in stating that it wasn't new. It was the first to start with Jesus, and before that, it was just that the Worldwide Church of God that Armstrong started was his version.
Well, I think a new spin on an old religion is really describes it. It's the church always felt, you know, well, we're going back to the original church. This is what the original church did. They didn't keep Christmas, they didn't keep Easter, they kept the Passover, they kept the fall festivals. That's what the early church did. So we're not inventing a new church. We're restoring a new church. That's why Dave Pack calls his church the Restored Church of God. You know, it's something that he's putting back together that used to exist in the past that he thinks is the accurate, true Church of God. So, in one sense, in major sense, to me, they're not new. There's nothing new, but there's old things given new spins with new personalities and new approaches that attract people now. Every age that's ever lived for the last 2,000 years has thought that they lived at the end of the age. The 1960s was the perfect time for me as a 14-year-old kid to come into the Worldwide Church of God. You had the Vietnam War, you had war in the Middle East, you had hippies, you had Woodstock, you had assassinated presidents, assassinated civil rights leaders. It was perfect. I thought Jesus had to be coming back within the next 20 minutes. But that's true of every generation.
Now, you mentioned, Dennis, that when Herbert had his beliefs and ideas and he approached those of the Church of God, they weren't very fond of it. It's kind of like David Pack did his own version of changing now what he said he was going to continue with Herbert Armstrong's teachings for the Worldwide Church of God. And now he's putting his new spin on it.
That's correct. It's as if the original church, and then it kind of went dormant for the last couple of centuries. And then I'm going to hold my hands up. There's like a wind-up toy that Herbert Armstrong spun and spun and spun, and then boom, it took off. And then the energy started declining. And then Mr. Armstrong died. And then people like Gerald Flurry and Dave Pack pick it up again and wind up again. And boom, it shoots off. And then, you know, slowly starts to decline over time. So in that way, that's kind of like that new movement. And I find it interesting because I didn't know in that documentary how they changed, you know, they don't want to call it cult anymore. To me, cult has always been a label that I would consider just like racism. It's like it's a judgment call whether, you know, somebody can make a racist comment, but are they racist in their hearts and in their minds? You could look at it at any religion and say, okay, it's a cult, but is it really a cult, and how do you define it becomes a problem. I guess racism might be a little easier. It's like, what is smut? What is, you know, the Supreme Court had to decide what is, you know, pornography. And what the organizations are doing is just continuing the way they can with what they know, but every iteration of those churches, because of the leader, change what they believe over time. Even, you know, Herbert Armstrong had, you know, the man died in his 90s. He had a long time, 50 years to change and evolve and grow and change his doctrines. And Dave Pack has kind of done the same thing, I think, on an accelerated course where Dave Pack is more apt to see himself in the Bible and take on Bible roles, and even things that Herbert Armstrong taught that only could belong to Jesus Christ. Dave Pack feels very comfortable applying to himself. And that's where I think the danger of, you know, people even being concerned with the cult. Why would you be concerned? Okay, Mormons are a cult too. Who cares? Or the Scientologists, who cares? It's when it becomes dangerous, and I guess coming back to the exploitation factor of its membership, there is some emotional and spiritual exploitation that happens. That's the pain and the damage that those kind of beliefs cause.
Moving forward, and I know that both of you have, you know, heard this, you know, there's obviously an eternal fascination with the word cult. It seems like anything that's something different, people will go ahead and label. And, you know, they say in the show, it stems from the mystery of, you know, how the leaders themselves exert such complete control, talking about Armstrong and talking about Pack, basically using everyday influences and control techniques. So how do you feel in regards to when you hear that the Worldwide Church and Restored Church of God, Mark, is being labeled by many as a cult? When we've done posts and different Facebook groups, some are very angry, going, why don't you just say what it is, a cult?
Is that directed for me? Yes. First? That's a good question. And again, it's a judgment call, because you have to make a determination for yourself. I know former members and former ministers from the Restored Church of God who openly call it, oh yeah, it's a cult. I accept it's a cult. I kind of have to deal with it that way. I've done a lot of research on it. I personally cannot call Restored Church of God a cult, even based on the show and going through the parameters. It doesn't quite fit. I mean, maybe 65, 70% might fit, but even in that show's own definition, it doesn't apply to the Restored Church of God. Dennis can chime in about what Worldwide and what he thinks about Restored, and we don't sit here and have an agreement party all the time. But I don't personally feel ready to say it's a cult, because when I joined because it was what the Bible taught. And I still believe the Bible. I still believe God, that there is a God, and that's his word. And until I'm ready to walk away from all that, I don't feel like I can call the Restored Church of God a cult, because I went in open-minded, open eyes. I read all the bad stuff online that I could find, because I wanted a full 360 view of what people say about this organization that I'm about to join. And I believed that the truth being taught was from the Bible, and they're not doing what I considered cultish stuff in my own mind, from what I understand about the Jim Jones and the Applewhite and San Diego and others. So I still to this day don't want to call them a cult, because I also feel as it diminishes what the real problem is with organizations like the Restored Church of God. Oh, that's just a cult, because then anybody can just dismiss it. Oh, it's a cult. It's like, no. In some ways, it's far worse than what that is, what people think of as far as cults are concerned.
Well, I think the membership, those people who join a church or an organization like that, they're not the ones that are the cult. To me, the cult is defined by the behavior and the characteristics of the leader. And the leader, whether it's Dave Pack, Herbert Armstrong, Gerald Flurry, whatever, you pick the other types, Benny Hinn, you name it. The cultish aspect is defined by the leader, not the members. The people that go into it not saying, well, I think I'll join a cult. Nobody belongs to a cult, as I've said, but the responsibility is not on the sincere member who for many reasons finds that to be attractive, whether it's more biblical, or it's more honest, or it's more secure, or they feel better, or they got more friends. That's normal. But cult, to me, is defined by the personality, behavior, requirements, laws, titles of the man who is in charge.
I actually fully understand that and kind of
And
agree.
if the man who's, yeah, okay.
Sorry, Dennis, you dropped off for a second, which is why she thought you were done.
Oh, I'm sorry. I found the members of the church to be just normal people, and it's the leadership that bears responsibility for any labels that they bring to themselves on cultic behaviors and characteristics.
I would say that when I first got into this, looking into the different things from Restored Church of God before I got more into Worldwide Church of God, I did feel that it was more of the leadership than the members. Like you stated, it's how they go about the things that they do. The members are just there, I personally feel, to be close with God, to do the right thing, to be part of a community. They're not the ones that are instituting all the different laws and rules and things that are going on in the church. When you get approached and saying, why aren't you on air just calling it a cult? Well, first off, I'm not qualified, and I'm not going to go and do a defamation of character on an organization that, quite frankly, I think even the US government has an issue taking certain organizations to court. I mean, we're not looking at a Jim Jones situation. We're not looking at a Waco situation. I mean, those are extreme forms. However, people are fearful that it could end like that for Restored Church of God if, say, David C. Pack feels towards the end of his life that, his prophecies are not coming true, and he would talk his members into doing something extreme. Also to the fact that people just can't understand the whole gate situation, why they have a front gate, why do they hand over all this money? Why do they follow this one person? So I can understand how some people can say that, but to use the word cult is a pretty, I think, harsh word to go ahead and label the members. I know that going forward in this, people wonder, again, why someone would be in an organization like this. And the show broke it down, basically saying that, you may be going through a transition, perhaps a difficult one in life. There was a quote saying, was starving, not very successful actor in my 20s in New York. When you're in that vulnerable state, you're going to be more open to trying something, maybe, pull a thing off a bulletin board and say, that you're going to want to go ahead and join that. Then there comes to, which is all part of a soft sell, going into the organization, you have questionnaires, just like a questionnaire about life and the universe. Are you happy? Once you take that first step and you go to that first meeting or talk or mediation group or Bible study, recruiters can work on you and invite you back. And it basically is a process from there. What does Restored Church of God and Worldwide Church of God do in the beginning for someone looking to join? Dennis?
Oh, that's easy to answer. There is a soft sell. Back in the day, the Plain Truth magazine was the flagship magazine of the church. And the approach was it was free, absolutely free, no charge, just sign up. Okay. And the booklets, and they were quality booklets. They cost millions of dollars for the church to publish these booklets on every conceivable religious biblical topic you can imagine. But they were all free for the asking. By the time you would say, oh, I'm really interested in this, I may call for a ministerial visit. Then you began to be brought into the church. And once you came into the church, now let's talk about tithing. Let's talk about 10% of your income. Let's talk about second tithe, third tithe. Then the average member of the church would look back and say, yeah, the hook was free, but the ride was very expensive. And so, yeah, there was that gentle approach. I find personally, it's my experience, the Seventh-day Adventist church, they draw people into the church, at least in my experience, with public prophecy seminars. Everybody's interested in prophecy. Everybody's scared of the days they live in. That's a hook. They don't have seminars on grace or let's teach tithing or whatever. It's a topic of general interest, and then they become the experts at it, and that's what their public Bible studies are about. And prophecy itself is a soft sell because you can sell at any time, but it's a strong hook, especially if the church teaches, not only are we teaching prophecy, but we're teaching you the right prophecy of what's really going to happen. And but the Worldwide Church of God's approach was free literature, absolutely free, that by the time you became a member, you found out, wow, it's pretty expensive to stay in this church.
Mark, what is your view in regards to what happens when you look to join Restored Church of God, and if there's a soft sell?
The answer is all exactly the same as what Dennis just said. And the Restored Church of God was following, what many came to call about many things called the grand pattern, the pattern set by the Worldwide Church of God and what Herbert W. Armstrong does. I had that very same thing. They have a magazine called The Real Truth today. That is the plain truth, successor, you could say, spiritually speaking, from a COG perspective. And they do the same thing. The only catch is that with the common doctrine, yes, tithes, and those are all things that are just easily read in the Bible. And those are kind of like, well, when you walk in the door, it's 10%. When the ministers approach people of substance and maybe some with not so much substance about the topic of common, there are different field ministers and headquarters ministers that have different approaches when the timing is correct for that. I knew about Common, and I was already baptized when I was accepted and restored because I was in United Church of God. So I didn't have to get sold on that because I heard it on my own and said, wow, I need to do this. But, I bought it. So the give all your, everything you have of substance, spare houses. Some people have been told, hey, mortgage your home and give us the money. I don't know too many of those stories. And since I don't have that story personally, that's for other people to tell. But the Common is the bigger hook that Herbert Armstrong, if he had only imagined Common with a church membership of over 100,000 people, if he had Common, that church financially might be still around today. I mean, who knows? But yeah, there's a sell. But again, going back to my previous statement, I was willing to be sold because what I believed I knew, what I knew before I came into, I actually technically came into United first, but when I came into, let's say, God's way, I was ready to accept the fact that I don't know what I thought I knew about the world and about God. So the financial part of it just gets sandwiched in between, don't eat pork and worship on the Sabbath.
Okay, and the next one is you're in a group that has found the answer. And you have this leader who's the only leader, who is the only one who can take you on this path, and everything else and everybody else is wrong. Dennis, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, everybody else was wrong. There were certain buzzwords, that the church would use about Christianity. One phrase was Christians so-called. That's everybody outside the church. Christians so-called. Another phrase was churchianity. Oh, those people are just believing in churchianity. Yeah, that separating of themselves, being chosen, for every chosen person, there's a whole bunch of unchosen people. So you do get that dichotomy of belief that goes on with the church in that way.
Mark, how is your view in regards to that found the answer? When they say one true church or the truth for Restored Church of God?
Yeah, I mean, I again have to echo everything that Dennis just said. There is a book called The One True Church, and The True Church and Its Incredible History. And then there's another True Church book, then the title's escaping me now. But when I read those while I was in the United Church of God, I attended there for 3 years and was baptized. I realized I was in the wrong place, because one sentence was, if you don't know that you're in the true church, if they don't teach that, then you're not in the true church. The thing is, though, much like all religions, and going back to Dennis's comment that everybody believes they're in the right place, even Pentecostals would say that, and Mormons would say that, and Scientologists would say that. In any cog, yes, I'm in the true place, I'm in the true church, but this is how I proved it. So yeah, if you're in Restored, and the people there now are in the only place that's the true church, because Dave Pack hammers that home, all the other churches are wrong. All the other churches of God are wrong. Philadelphia is wrong, Living is wrong, United is wrong, COG was wrong, and all the other little tiny ones, and I can't remember their names, they're all wrong. You're here, you're in the right place. I am God's authority telling you this stuff, so that's why people stay.
Okay, and the next point that was pointed out in the show goes, which the leader will often solidify by creating an external enemy. He said to me, you're going to be raped, you're going to be beaten, you're going to be left in a ditch. He said all these horrible things about what would happen to me if I left the world was such an evil place. This means that you're going to psychologically run to the cult leader. You become in a perpetual state of denial of your own reasoning power. You don't reason anymore. People in this state of cognitive dissonance, they're going to choose over and over and over for the cult or the cult leader. The idea of leaving the cult and going into the world is very terrifying. And goes, I remember being scared to cross the street because I was afraid that, God would take my life. It's difficult also because you're not used to making your own decisions. I'll break this down extremely simple, as in the fact of how Armstrong and David Pack treated what would happen if you left the church, the outside world, and if there was possible scare tactics to keep you inside from the outside world. Mark?
Yeah, and I'm sure Dennis can speak to this too, because once you accept it, and there are, again, verses in the Bible that back this up, and I still with my own conscience have to weigh these things because I'm aware of what the Bible says and not just Dave Pack or what Herbert Armstrong said. If you leave the church, you have a real risk of going into the lake of fire. Most people would say, oh, you're going to hell for eternal judgment or damnation, and that's not the way the Bible teaches it. But the lake of fire, where you are burned up by God because God hates you at that point and he has no qualms about watching your existence be snuffed out forever. That is the risk that everybody has, and they have to weigh, am I going to stay here because once I leave, I'm Antichrist? And I heard many times, and I know it's probably said about me, and it's said about people who leave, once you leave the restored Church of God, you run the risk of lake of fire. You run the risk of being, in the book of Revelation with all the plagues and all the torments across the world, that you might be martyred and murdered and tortured, and you have to accept that fact. So people have to weigh how much I don't believe this is what he's teaching is true and that this isn't the way God is working, versus I could die eternally. And that is the biggest risk everyone can take in existence according to the Bible, not just dying and going to the grave, but just dying and never, ever, ever coming up again or being a part of God's plan forever. So if you want to call that a deterrent for leaving, it's a pretty big one. And I know that is not just Dave Pack's origin. It comes from Herbert Armstrong and probably even before then, because there are verses in the Bible that do warn that. So I have to weigh that personally. Is that Dave Pack's opinion or what the Bible says? And when I read it in the Bible, it's like it still gives me time to think and pause and go, what am I doing? And that is the risk of leaving, that I really could be making God angry and that I'm gone forever.
Dennis, what is your view on this?
Well, I'll bump it up a little bit and say that the Bible gives any man of any church, whether one-man show, all the bullets, all the ammunition, all the scriptures they need to draw on to scare people into staying in their seats. I would say if you really want to know this approach, just look up the definition of an abusive boyfriend. And you'll find that the leader of the church often has the same characteristics as an abusive boyfriend. In other words, you need me. You'll never make it without me. You need this church. You won't survive outside the church. But there's a scripture that says to turn people over to the devil in the New Testament so that they can be saved in the day of salvation. The Bible gives plenty of scriptures to scare people of all denominations, if used against them, to stay in that seat, regardless of what that church teaches. But if you look up just the symptoms of being in a relationship with an abusive boyfriend, it'll sound very familiar when you look at some of these cultic leaders. And one of the key qualities or traits of an abusive boyfriend to their partner is, you need me. You can't make it without me. And that particular approach is pretty common. You'll get that. You step outside the church and your life will go right down the toilet.
I mean, that has to be hard when I've heard stories of former members leaving those churches and they still have family and friends in there, and their relationships, I guess you could say are strained because everything that they were taught what would happen if you leave, you left, and then they still got family members that are on the inside. Mark, what is your experience in, when you were getting close to thinking about leaving, was it any thought in your head what would happen with your friendships and things like that for you?
Well, there are friendships within the church that I had to accept would probably be severed. And in most cases that is the case, because if you communicate with an antichrist out after they leave the church, and they started hammering it pretty hard about a year ago, you're actually sinning. And for folks still in the church, that weighs on their conscience. And, you know, I did not want to pursue friendships. I kind of let people know, hey, I left. And if they wanted to stay in communication, they could, but I would not force, you know, communication with people. There are people here in town that I used to spend a lot of time with them. I used to just be able to drop by their house and say hello on a Sunday, but I haven't done that only because I don't want them to feel like, oh, Mark's here, we're sinning if we, you know, invite him in for a cup of coffee. So I don't want to put people in that position. So those kind of friendships, you kind of kiss goodbye, but I still maintain contact with people. They're like, look, I'm still going to be your friend regardless. But then the church would consider them, those are rebellious people anyways. And now they've opened the door to the devil, which now I'm an agent of the devil because I left, and that I'm going to work to get them to leave. And that's why the church warns, don't associate with these people. They will pull you out. Family members will pull you out if you let them, and you always have to be on your guard. So in that way, you accept the change that's going to happen. For a lot of churches, the social circles are closed, going to picnics and you know, Saturday night game parties, you know, playing cards and just having a good time with people you actually care about, pizza parties and those types of things. That goes all out the window too. So when you leave an organization, it becomes for a lot of people, it is a social club. When you leave that social structure, you are giving up a lot of what you had. But conversely, I had friends that were outside the church and family members, which I knew this was going to happen. They were so glad I left. They were more glad that I left than I was not glad I left. I'm still not glad I left. I wanted to be in the right place and do the right thing. And I feel like the church was taken off track when David 𝙃𝙃 declared himself Elijah and that prophet. That was the death knell for the restored Church of God, in my opinion, and other people I've talked to that left. That was the moment when they said, I don't think I'm in the right place anymore. It just took me a couple years to really make sure I was making the right decision, praying with God, fasting, asking him, I'm going to quit unless you show me I need to stay. And that never happened, so I left.
Which brings us to the key way cult leaders scale up from their control: simple peer pressure. This fundamental human desire to be part of a group can override even our own perception of reality, all to serve the whims of a likely sociopath narcissist. Dennis, do you feel that Armstrong could be considered a sociopath narcissist?
Well, I have to have this disclaimer that I'm not a trained psychologist. One can look up the traits of malignant narcissism. There's excellent, because there's so many of them. Many politicians who, I think almost all people who rise to high position almost have to be narcissists, because to get to high positions, either in politics or religion, you have to not have a conscience. And that is, you have to be willing to step on people and not care. That's a strong characteristic. I never questioned Herbert Armstrong's sincerity. I don't think he deliberately was trying to make money. That was his goal. I really believe that he believed he was who he thought he was. He saw the Bible in the correct way. I do believe there were people around him that either did not speak up and hold him to certain accountability. And accountability is always a problem in a one-man show. They're not accountable. 𝙃𝙃 is not accountable for his actions, his words, his mistakes. So I can't judge, psychological conditions, but I know the traits, I know the characteristics, and these men can rack up quite a few of those particular traits that are very common to either malignant narcissism or sociopathic behaviors. But I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm not qualified for that, but I suspect.
Mark, what is your view on this?
I again have to mirror what Dennis just said because I'm not qualified to diagnose people. The Bible says, by their fruits you shall know them. And when you see the fruits that are bad and they're in your face bad, then you have to accept that they're bad. But then there's another Bible verse, if you want to get into the Bible conflicting the Bible, it's like there is not both sweet water and salty water coming out of the same fountain. It's like, okay, but there's the church of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I would say all the leaders, including Herbert Armstrong, who was by no means a saint and perfect, and Dave Pack even says that he's not a saint and he's not perfect. None of us are, I would say I'm not taking the moral high ground, and in some ways against the Bible lens, I'm far worse than any member who's still inside the Restored Church of God because I've chose to lead the organization, and I fully accept that. But what these people are doing and hurting other people financially, emotionally, and spiritually that's the fruit of their doings. And when they teach false doctrines and false prophecies, and now it's let's change the language. I'm telling, I'm not foretelling, I'm not really a prophet, I'm just prophesying. That's when things get really muddy, and it's like, well, these leaders, again, I agree that Dave Pack is, let's say, sincere, like Herbert Armstrong was sincere. I don't think other people have different opinions, but I don't see him doing this as a scam, as an angle, as, a grifter, like he knows that he's doing wrong. He's preaching falsely, but doesn't know it. But the one thing the Bible does not uphold as far as a characteristic that God appreciates or has any respect for is sincerity. Sincerity is not in the Bible. Honesty, truth, that is in the Bible. Sincerity is not. Because Christians of this world, in quotes, are sincere people. Muslims are sincere people. Mormons are sincere people. But that doesn't mean that God respects that if you look through the lens of the Bible. And so I would apply that to David C. Pack. I believe the man is sincere, but God doesn't see that as a virtue.
Okay, moving forward. In the show, they brought up a few good things. It says, today, a different kind of threat is driving people to search for a new source of meaning. There's an epidemic of social isolation, so serious it's been recognized as a public health threat in countries around the world. Medical experts believe loneliness is becoming Australia's new public health crisis. America is in the grips of loneliness epidemic. Plus, they also referred to, I didn't go fully into it, that there's also online influences. Some people believe that are malicious / cult leaders, because now we have the wonderful world of the internet. And it says, whether that alternative narrative is built online or in the physical world on the promises of social justice or the promise of a better, happier, successful self, they all use the same methods of control, and they're all incredibly hard to escape. It's hard to leave a cult because it's your whole world. In time, the majority of cult members will leave on their own. Often they will discover the infallible leader is so infallible, it was commonplace for him to throw out a date when in the end of the world would be. If you look at his track record, he was very inconsistent. So in going with this, I know that Armstrong in his time, like you said, Dennis, had a lot of free material, expensive material that he sent out. I guess you can consider that the webbish time, because things came in mail. Now we have David C. Pack, who has all these videos available, all the sermons available. So people are able to go ahead and see that. And in that, there is where David C. Pack is actually doing specific dates for his end of times. I'm sure Mark will correct me on how that's supposed to be worded, but Armstrong he didn't give specific dates in regards to that. Dennis, how did Armstrong go ahead and refer to the end of times? I guess you could say that he was predicting.
I think it was much more generic. the phrase that I heard, the concept that was very common was that Christ could return within 3 years, 5 years at the most, 10 at the outside, and certainly within 20. And that got to be a joke in the church, you know. And the return of Christ often matched the age of the person that was speculating about it. Herbert Armstrong believed for a long time that Jesus would come in his lifetime. You know, now when I met him, he was quite elderly. And so I thought, well, this isn't going to last long because he's not going to last long. But I really think that probably it disturbed his faith when Christ didn't return in his lifetime. But it was not, there was never a date. We had one booklet called 1975 in Prophecy that came out in the 60s. People took that as a date that Jesus would return or the tribulation would begin. I don't think that book was pointing to that, but that idea got going. But as opposed to Dave Pack, who in the last 6 months has said, you know, it's coming this date, that holiday, that holy day, over and over and over. I don't know how many times one human being can be wrong, mistaken, especially on theological issues, for people to not say, you know, this is crazy, this is nuts. I'm not going to abide by this anymore. But, you know, sure enough, he'll come out with another Tuesday morning 3 weeks from now that can't possibly be wrong, and the math is correct. That approach never was a part of the Worldwide Church of God. It was much more generic.
Mark, we've already established that David C. Pack will come up with either a specific date or more narrowed down timeline. This must have been, for those inside the church and yourself, extremely hard to consistently deal with. You're preparing for something that doesn't come, and then it changes again. And that has to mentally and emotionally mess with you. They talk about all these people that are having, you know, loneliness and specific issues. When you were thinking about leaving the church, especially when you discovered that, you know, these dates are going to keep coming and going, was there a fear for you that once you left, you weren't going to have that support system no more that you were used to having? And then once you got on outside of the church, you know, you had no idea exactly what was going to happen. So my question for you is with all the dates that David C. Pack was having happen, did that affect your wanting to stay or leave?
There's two parts to your question. The first part, I'll take the social aspect of it. I knew what I was going to be giving up, but I was also not raised in the church where my family members were still there and all my friends were still there. So regardless of the social cost of leaving the church, I was looking at it from the perspective of the Bible and what God says. And, you know, he doesn't say stick around because there's a lot of people there because you're going to miss your family. In fact, you know, Jesus came to put mother against daughter and father against son. I mean, there's verses that you can use to show that, you know, Christ came to disrupt families because he knew this would happen. So that wasn't even a concern for me. And I knew what I was giving up socially. And quite frankly, I was like, what was more important, following a man that I know is false so that I could go to the socials and the summer picnics and, you know, the pizza parties? It wasn't worth it to me. So I decided to leave. So it was a factor. The date setting also, like in Worldwide, it became a joke and people could joke about it very carefully with each other, because, you know, oh, just hold your breath, there'll be another date, you watch. And so at first when I was in the church, I believed the dates. And then like right when I came in 2012, the first date that was actually set that Dave Pack ever set was known as Elul 21, which is the Hebrew calendar of 2013. And it gave him a good 8, 9, 10 months of preparation for the entire church that this was really going to happen. That date failed, and then he got quiet for a couple of years about setting dates. But then more recently, you know, Dennis is being generous when he says in the past 6 months, in the past 30 days, Dave Pack set 4 dates: May 15th, May 30th, June 5th, and then again, June 14th, when some biblical event is going to happen. And that is not even his record. His record was back in 2020, which for 5, 6 weeks in a row, Christ was coming every week for 6 weeks in a row. And by the end of the 6 weeks, a reasonable, logical human being goes, this can't be happening. Why wasn't he true 5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? But your question about when I left, I wondered, did I just miss it? If I had just hung on to the 102nd time he set a date, man, I left at 101. I should have hung in there till 102. And I know that's what people are doing over there. They're now at 150th day. And I'm just throwing a number out there. That's not a literal number of how many times he set dates. But man, if I leave at 150, okay, oh man, I left at 151. I just missed the kingdom. Like, oh man, came so close to the end of getting into the kingdom. I'll just beat myself up, so I'm going to stay for one more time. It's the perpetual carrot on the stick. And the carrot never gets any closer to you, but man, it just keeps dangling right in front of you, like no matter what you try to do. That's a method of control. We talked earlier about control methods. I think date setting is also a method. Not intentional by David Pack. Again, I believe he's sincere, but the fact of what it does is, man, if I just hang in one more week, oh man, he sent another date. Like 2 days later, or the very next day after it fails, okay, I've got another date for you. I've got some exciting information. God opened my eyes. I've got something that we never could have seen before. God wanted this failure to happen. He doesn't call it a failure because he wanted to test God's people. He was waiting to see what you're going to do. What did you give in common? What did you give in your offerings for Pentecost? There's all these reasons, and there will always be more dates. And so Dave Pack has taken it to the next level that, no other COG leader in the history of recorded COGs have set as many dates as David C. Pack. Even Harold Camping in the resurrection will laugh at Dave Pack and say, look how many dates you set.
They go on to say when they find their guide to moral life is actually a hypocrite. They all took vows of celibacy, pretended to keep those vows. I'm going to change this into Armstrong as what you consider a hypocrite when he decided that, in the beginning, he was against divorce. But yet later on down the road, he condoned it for a divorce for himself to remarry. Dennis, do you consider this as a leader who ended up being a hypocrite?
I think all leaders end up being human beings. I think my experience, I've heard a lot of pronouncements about not doing this, never doing that, never being this. I know many ministers who have fallen off wagons, horses, cable cars, symbolically, because they're people. And one thing that religion doesn't allow, especially a church pastor, to be is a human being. If a church member makes a mistake, a moral mistake, a financial, whatever, something to be forgiven of, they demand to be forgiven. The Bible says forgive. When a pastor makes a mistake, is a human being, behaves like anybody else, but because they're the pastor, the tendency to hide it is so much greater because of the pressure not to even have a problem, that the punishment for a pastor is merciless. It's just merciless. So I don't look at it so much as hypocrisy as the inability of many people in high positions or any position to realize that everybody is a human being. We all have our issues. We all have our experiences. We all have our pulls, desires, and so on. And to go into religion, be a Christian, to get baptized, to be repentant, plays very little part in the fact that you're going to struggle being a human being for the rest of your life. And so I think I don't look at it as hypocrisy near as much as a denial of their humanity.
But wasn't Armstrong having God speak to him? I'm not saying that like he still isn't a human being, but should those leaders who have, the ear of God directly talking to them be at a different standard than us regular humans? So
yeah, I get that. Yeah, no, I get that. If you're going to make bold claims, you better be able to behave in bold ways and or not bold ways. And so, yeah, it's a conundrum. I don't understand how a man can say that God told me. I don't understand how a Dave Pack can feel that he has exclusive knowledge with God, or God now is showing me this or that. That kind of boggles my mind that somebody thinks they're that special or they're that in touch. To me, some of that borders on what we talked about: narcissism, personality disorders, mental illnesses, of which there's a lot in leaders. And I've said for years that a man or a woman with a mental illness or a personality disorder can hide in a church environment easier than they can at IBM, because their quirkiness or their weirdness or their severe obedience can be mistaken for righteous behavior, doing what the Bible says, being like God. I mean, there's a scripture that says, become you therefore perfect, like your Father in heaven is perfect. Some say it means become mature, like your God in heaven is mature. Well, good luck with that. I've never met one human being who ever came remotely close to that. And the ones that I have met who think they're that close are the narcissists and are the cult leaders and are the people who are out of touch, not only with their humanity, but with reality. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just my observation.
Now, Mark, we could say that Pack isn't fond of animals, as in he didn't tell his members you can't own an animal, yet from speaking with you, most of them don't, yet he has expensive horses on the property, on the church's dime. So isn't that a little bit hypocritical?
Well, first of all, I don't know who paid for the horses, so we can't say it's on the church's dime. I could have a theory about that, but Dave Pack may have paid out of his own pocket for the horses. I wouldn't call them expensive horses either. They're probably secondhand horses that they got a good deal on. So again, they're not like Arabian thoroughbreds. So please don't give out that impression that that's what it is. I'm sorry, can you state your question again? I was countering what you
Well, most of the members don't have animals, that's that away
well,
from funds and stuff to give to the church. And it's not so much that the horses buying them were that expensive, but the upkeep of them, the food,
Sure.
I mean, everything that you have to do
that costs,
with
yeah.
horses, and it's on church property.
Right. Well, that's a question for him, not for me. I mean, he has preached from the pulpit that he doesn't believe members should own pets. No cats, no dogs, not just exotic animals. Or farmers have farms because they're running a business, and that's not what he was talking about. I haven't heard that in a long time, but I know it's been brought up in points before in the past, and he has told people because pets are a financial expense that you then could be giving all that dog food money to the church every month. And that's for people to weigh on their conscience. No minister in the Restored Church of God owns a pet. They don't have cats. I mean, maybe they do, and they just secretly don't talk about it. Specifically at headquarters, they don't, because of that teaching. It's not a thus says the Lord, but when it comes from the mouth of Dave Pack, the ministry, especially at headquarters, better take it as thus says the Lord, or they'll get a talking to from somebody. You'd have to ask him why it's okay to have horses on the campus, and yet people aren't allowed to have dogs. That's a question for him. I don't have the answer, but I will also say that at least when I was there, when I left in March of 2021, the local brethren who had experience with horses were invited to come and ride the horses on the weekends, on socials. They'd bring them out from people from out of town. Hey, we're going to have a horse riding session. Come out and ride the horse for 10 minutes or whatever it is. So it's not only for personal use, it's also for those that are here in Wadsworth.
The other point is now neither Armstrong or Pack have said you cannot go to the doctor, but they have preached in a way that states that God will take care of you, but yet they both seek their own medical care. Dennis, do you see that from Armstrong's point of view, as you know, in the earlier years, he preached that you didn't need to go, you know, people didn't need their vaccines, but then towards the later years, I mean, he had a lot of medical issues and he kind of changed his tune. Your opinion?
Well, that's that idealism that goes with being younger. Let me make it clear, the New Testament clearly teaches, if any is sick among you, let him call for the elders of the church, let them be anointed with oil, the prayer of faith will save, and they shall be made well, they'll be healed. That was what they stuck to. Then they went on to say, well, that doesn't say you should go to the doctor. Now, lots of churches do anointing for healing, but then they say, don't cancel your chemotherapy, you know. So the church did have, the worldwide church did have the kind of understood that it was doctors, it was divine healing only. That evolved out of that strictness over the years. And I'm sure Herbert Armstrong never thought he was going to get old enough before Jesus returned to need any kind of medication or help. But of course, he did avail himself to that. That's well understood. And as I've said in the other program, I never personally adopted as a pastor, I never taught anybody divine healing only. You know, pray about it, let me anoint you. And if you don't get better and die, that's your problem. Maybe you didn't have the faith. You know, I took people to the hospital. I told them to go to the hospital. I told them to see their doctors, and I'll anoint them at the hospital. That's just common sense. That's how I grew up. But the New Testament does make it very plain that the path to healing is through anointing and not through the medical profession. And there are other whole denominations that see it just the same way and have had just the same experience with being too narrow-minded in their approach to that before they kind of grew up. And a lot of them now say, yeah, we used to think that way, but we don't think that way anymore. And that's usually related to the fact that people that used to teach it got older and realized, I'm going to need some help here. And I know Mr. Pack, you know, I don't know what he teaches on that. I'm sure that'll come up here shortly, but I know he has availed himself to plenty of medical attention for his own needs.
Mark, your take on this?
I would say the evolution of Worldwide Church of God moving away from that definitely had an impact on Restored. I've never heard Dave Pack up at the sermon say, don't go to the doctor or don't get checked up, don't, you know, do any kind of medical thing. And perhaps there was some legal advice that was given that, you know, if you tell somebody from the pulpit, don't get, you know, God will heal you, don't get cancer treatment, and that person dies, the family will sue. And that has never happened. And I don't remember ever hearing I can't get a physical. What are you talking about? I mean, the state of Ohio offered businesses in the area free medical screenings, which Restored Church of God invited them, and the entire headquarters staff, which doesn't have health insurance because they couldn't afford it, even though there's common, why couldn't they afford it out of that? But that's a different question. And we got medical treatment. We got medical screenings right there at headquarters. And so I never ever heard or saw anything that was remotely like, don't get medical treatment. And so that was a teaching that probably died long before Restored was established in 1999.
Okay, so we're going to go to the closing thoughts. Can Worldwide Church of God and Restored Church of God and the Splinters be considered a cult? One, is there a charismatic authoritarian leader that members believe what he said was straight from the mouth of God? Dennis?
Yes.
Mark?
Not straight from the mouth of God, but God is putting thoughts in his mind and giving him, you know, opening his eyes to the Bible in the way he wants to see it. So in a roundabout way, no, but it's kind of more of a maybe.
Okay.
Restored.
Two, is there a form of indoctrination to reform or mind control, like using the Bible by putting all his programs in there and people accept it because they accept the Bible? Mark?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes, absolutely. And it's in the Bible.
And
The Bible
three,
is the program.
yes. And three, the last one, is exploitation either sexual, financial, or some type of exploitation of the members? Dennis?
Maybe. I don't think it's deliberate on the part of most. I think if it unfolds, it's because of being a human being, but I don't think it's deliberate. That's not the motive. I believe that they believe what they believe because they really believe it.
Mark?
I would say specifically with RCG, which is the only church that has the common doctrine, that it would be a yes. That is exploitation, taking the scriptures, making it say what you want for a financial gain. That is not proven anywhere else in the Bible, and only proven by Dave Pack by him shuffling the deck and putting certain verses together.
Okay. So there you have it. We laid it out. It is for you, the viewers, to decide. We are not going to say whether yes or no on any of these. They're all personal opinions. We've also stated that none of us are professionals. We're not medical, we're not doctors, we're not therapists. So we can't state in regards to somebody being a sociopath or having a specific mental illness. This is all just a discussion, because many have wondered why we have not gone out and put labels. At this point, I can say that it's probably a personal opinion, but we all have agreed on a few key points. The members themselves are not cult, okay? The second key point is that we all believe that there isn't so much of a charismatic, there is authoritarian there, and that there was no sexual anything involved, but you could possibly consider finances in certain terms. These churches, again, we are not going to go ahead and put a label. That would be for an expert to go ahead and do. I highly recommend that you watch the show Explained, which is on Netflix. It is season 2, episode 1, called Cults. The transcript will be available for you to read from that as well. I will make sure I attach the links. And also, again, this is all personal opinion. It is up for you to decide what you feel. I think you, Mark, you had a great perspective from Restorative Church. And Mark, I know that some people will say that you're being biased since you haven't been in the church for so long. And I can honestly tell the viewers no. I mean, he's being sincere exactly about what he sees. And I see what he sees because he's explained things in depth. I've also, heard stories from other members and done a bunch of reading. And as for Dennis's point of view is on spot as well. If anybody who has been in as long as he has a great point of view. And I thank you both for this. We will be continuing more discussions in regards. There is a couple other parts that we'll be doing in regards to some questionnaires and going through that. And then again, in the end, you, the viewers, you decide on your own. Thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.